Hey everyone, welcome to Tent Talk, the Farmers Market podcast. This podcast is all about farmers markets. Whether you're a farmers market manager or a small farmer, food maker, or artisan selling at farmers markets, you have found just the right podcast.
I'm Kat Fields-White.
And I'm Bridget Myers. We're longtime farmers market managers, educators, and consultants. Get ready to catch up on all things farmers market pros with us. Today we're discussing space fees at farmers markets and how to make paying those easier for farmers, vendors, and market managers.
Today's episode of Tent Talk, the Farmers Market podcast, is supported by Square, helping small farmers, food makers, crafters, and market managers increase their incomes by making it easy to process sales on the street and in the tents. We use Square ourselves, both for selling shopping bags and t-shirts at our market info booths and for invoicing farmers and vendors online for space fees. The income you generate appears promptly in your bank account without spending time or money on end-of-day closeouts. Square's user-friendly system makes it easy to track inventory and payroll and generate clear reports. For more information on making bookkeeping easier and increasing your income with Square, click their logo on the resource page at farmersmarketpros.com.
All right, everybody. Well, welcome back to Tent Talk.
Here we are. Podcasting, market managing, holiday market conceptualizing, and working ahead on the conference. We've got some conference news coming up soon.
Ooh, I'm so excited. Yes, we're just chugging right along, feeling good.
Yeah.
Things are happening. Seems like a busy little market world happening. There's lots of chatter in our Facebook group and with our conference people that are signed up to attend, very excitedly just chatting us and
speakers going back and forth.
Yeah.
Doing a lot of work with our speakers right now. So it's
Very
going to be a
excited.
good one.
Yep. But on today's episode of Tent Talk, we are chatting about how to collect the space fees that farmers and vendors pay to support the cost of producing farmers markets. There are lots of variations of how that happens, some easier than others, and some like very different structures than others.
Yeah.
I have learned.
There's a big variety.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, we learned that as we talk to other market managers and farmers and vendors. Sometimes I talk to the vendors at our markets and they tell me stories that are fascinating to me.
They either give me ideas for how to improve my system or they boggle my mind completely.
Right.
And I have follow-up questions and I want to talk to those managers.
That's right. How is this working? Why is this working?
And I'm sure people think that about
I'm sure.
our system when they talk to other vendors or when we're at meetups and share our systems. So this is, obviously what we know, what we've learned from other folks, what we do at our markets, ideas that we've seen discussed, and systems that we know work or don't work for folks. So that's what we're going to
Lots of variety.
bring to this
no
episode.
right single answer.
Correct. Yes.
Yep. So starting with the basics, for anyone new to the world of farmers markets,
Mm-hmm.
our job is weird. Why are there space fees?
Yeah. I think folks
Some people don't realize.
they don't realize they're always asking, oh, do you charge your vendors and farmers to attend? It's like, yes, indeed.
Yes, we do.
We sure do. I mean, all businesses have income and expenses. And so our business, as the operator side, farmers markets are businesses. So we have income and expenses. And our income is from the farmers and vendors.
Right.
Really is like, I think that's most structures. Sometimes it's like grant income or other kind of avenues. But for the most part, the folks participating in the market that you are putting together are paying you to participate. And that's your income.
Right. And and that's normal because most people who are selling things anywhere are
Mhm.
paying some kind of rent.
Yeah.
So they're paying rent for the space. You're handling the big overhead of how the event comes together, permit fees, traffic control equipment and staff, if that's a market that generates the kind of traffic where you need that.
Mhm.
Insurance, big one for us, not for everybody.
Mhm.
Everybody has insurance now, I think, but big one for us because we're in a big city and we're at a big market in some of our situations.
Yep.
Your market operations staff,
Mm-hmm.
the people that manage your EBT processes, if you're doing that, marketing. That's the biggest justification, I think, for space fees is that we are, as managers, doing all the things that bring a flow of people to the front of the vendors and farmers booths.
Exactly. Yep. So our job is to bring you customers. And so you are paying us for that.
Yeah.
And then also just like equipment rental, porta potties, I'm thinking of all the things that just increase their prices on me.
Yeah.
No parking signs, the hourly rate for the people towing the cars, cleaning if you're in like a piazza or like outdoor space that needs to be cleaned, that's something that I
Somebody
pay
has to
for.
get paid to do that.
Pressure washing.
Yep.
Yes. So
All the things. So
all the
that's
things.
kind of the basics of why there's space fees. That's the income that offsets all those expenses to putting on the event. Sometimes backed up with grants or sponsorships or other ways that we can figure out, friends of the market programs that we can figure out to kind of subsidize that. But the basic source of income that makes sense is rent for the people that sell there. It's kind of like a mall, but way more fun and cool.
Super cool.
Cool.
Way more fun and cool. And just like a mall or another space, another retail space or brick and mortar, there's different levels of overhead and different things to consider. And so that's why space fees vary.
Yeah, for sure.
Sometimes drastically market to market.
So when it comes to setting rates, you want to make your rates low enough to make sense in the farmers and vendors income and expense columns. Obviously, you're generating X amount of sales or X amount of customers that they can make sales to. And then that is offset by their expenses. So they have staff and they have equipment and obviously what they produce. And then they have rent. So they have to balance that all out just like every business does. The fact, though, is every once in a while I'll see a comment from somebody. We had a meme, I think, on vendor advisories and not reading them. And somebody commented, unless you're sending me an email to tell me that the space rent is lowered, I'm not going to read it. And we had responded to him and said, you know what? Maybe you're in the wrong market. The lowest space rent is not necessarily to your advantage. There's a lot of parts and pieces to that. So maybe instead what you want in an advisory is tips on how to make better sales. So read that one, sir.
Yeah, I think we've had this discussion. I certainly have with vendors and just, in our conversations. But charging, I think market managers get an idea that, these are small businesses. They're just starting out. I need to only charge them a little bit of money because they're just getting on their feet and they need to be able to keep as much of their sales as possible. So I understand that thought. But if you're only charging a little bit, you can't produce a market that is going to bring the foot traffic to these vendors that is going to enable them to make a living because there's not going to be enough customers there. They're not going to be able to scale, all of those things. So it's kind of like this circular thing. It's like you can put a restaurant in like not a great part of town that doesn't have a lot of folks looking for a restaurant and the rent's probably cheaper. But are you going to do a lot of business there? And are you going to stay in business? Versus paying a little bit higher rent to put a restaurant on a main street in a busier neighborhood where you're going to be busy and you're going to be able to keep that restaurant open for many, many years because it's thriving. So the same things happen with markets. You're paying for the experience that you're getting. Finding that balance is definitely tricky. I mean, coming up with that, what is that like arbitrary number that we're charging vendors? So you need to put a lot of thought into that, but it's not really lower is better.
Right, for sure. Lowest rent doesn't necessarily equal the best bottom line.
Exactly.
So you got to look at your income and your expenses.
Yeah.
So it's got to be low enough to make sense for them, but it also has to be high enough to provide the market with enough operating income to produce the best possible market. And honestly, the market may also be a fundraiser for a community group, or it could be a private business where the operator also wants to make a reasonable profit. We all have to look at income versus expenses.
Yeah, exactly. So it's vendors that maybe are selling really great items for a higher cost than maybe you could get somewhere else. They're making a living because they're providing a good product that people want to pay for. Market managers also kind of see their markets that way. We're providing a really great experience for market or for vendors. And so those vendors need to pay maybe a little bit higher fee to be in this great market that we're producing. And then our business is making more money too.
Right.
So it's just kind of, it depends. Like, what is the mission of your market? Like, is there any additional funding behind your market? So taking all of those numbers into account, just like somebody who's selling, bread at the market, they need to take into account what is the cost of flour and water and kitchen rental, all those things. That also applies to farmers markets very much so because there's all these different factors that go into that. And we need to be able to cover our expenses because you don't want a market manager that's not charging enough, can't keep a good staff there to work and produce the market, can't pay themselves, so it's not working for them, and then the market closes.
Yeah.
And then no vendors are making any money.
Right.
They're not doing any sales.
That won't work either.
Yeah.
And then I think the last element is the same one that farmers and vendors have to look at. If you're making the most incredible cookie in the world, but in order to do that, your ingredients and your staffing is bringing you to a level where you have to charge $9 per cookie, there's also a limit to what the market will bear. So you also have to look at kind of comps in your area, who's producing what kind of market for what kind of space fee around you. So you got to take things into account. And it may be that you have to underprice your space rent at the beginning, especially if you're a newer market, because there are established markets around that maybe aren't providing maximum foot traffic and things. but that's what people have been paying for rent. And so there's going to be a little bit of sticker shock if you go straight to what you ultimately should be charging. You may need to start a little bit lower and work your way up as you prove to them that you're actually going to do a better job and produce more traffic for them.
Definitely. I think a lot of vendors come into newer markets expecting to pay a little bit less because they're also taking a risk if you're just starting a newer market and they're not sure if it's going to work as well. So you kind of take that risk together by charging them a little bit less. They're paying to be there even though they're not certain what's going to happen, and then you can grow together. The market grows and gets busier. They pay a little more as you go on, and so it just kind of helps lift both businesses, both the market operator and the vendor business. They grow and lift together, but starting off at that baseline is important. And then just I see some markets or special events like pop-up events that come in and their booth space rental is like astronomical. And I don't know how they're coming to that conclusion that that's what they should charge for a booth, but the highest booth rental market is not necessarily the best either. So I think vendors are like, oh, this, the booth space is, $350 for this special event. It must be great. Like I'm going to make way more than $350 because of course they're charging this. So they are expecting our sales to be, in the thousands, but that's not necessarily true either. So as vendors and farmers, you have to take a look at like who's producing the market and why is the space rent that high and
how much marketing's been done for it. Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah. So on the vendor side, I'm sure it's tough to try to figure out where to go and how much your business can bear as a space fee as well. But that's why we're talking about this today, kind of like flesh out the why and then the how different markets work with this.
Yeah. We may have another episode down the road here with maybe a couple of our good farmers and vendors and talk about how they determine which market to go to. I know we have a session like that coming up at the Intense Conference.
Yeah.
Yeah. So
yeah. I think it's really important. When I print yearly reports sometimes for folks to ask, it's like they pay us a lot of money to be at the market. And so, if they've stayed in and they're not leaving the market, obviously they're making the sales to stay there and their business is doing well. But it's like, that's an important decision for them to make as a vendor and farmer. How much am I going to invest into this market in my rental space? How can I make the most of it when I'm there and bring in the best, the most revenue? But just as market operators, appreciating that is a tough decision for them.
Sure. Got to think about return on investment.
For sure.
So there's a lot of different variations in how people charge or pay space fees. There's weekly or monthly or sometimes seasonal flat rate. We see markets where you pay up front for the 38 weeks that market is open during the year.
Yeah.
So there's that. I find and I hear from market managers that sometimes there's resistance to that or just an inability to pay because it's a huge chunk of money. And that tends to, just in my experience talking to folks, a lot of times those markets are actually charging less than they should be on a week-to-week basis because they're going to have to justify this 38 times that due up front in one big chunk, and that number looks too daunting. And so their response to that is to take the actual weekly space rent down, when maybe a better response would be to provide people the option to pay a month at a time or to pay for half the season and then the other half.
Yeah.
So
I think that they don't want to present this huge number because if it's for the whole season, sometimes that's 4 months of a weekly market. That's a lot to multiply that by. And also I think in discussing this with like some folks who have this structure that I've talked to, like charging the whole season ahead of time in their mind helps them be able to plan that they're going to have X amount of vendors there every single week because they've committed and they've paid the whole season.
And X amount of income to operate the market. So, I mean, I understand why they do that.
Yeah. Yeah. It's just kind of.
But then it can get tricky.
It can get tricky. Like, could they bring in more income, produce a slightly better event because they have more income when they're charging weekly or even, monthly during the season. So
stage that a little bit.
Yep.
And then there's a lot of markets. We're a flat rate market at all of our markets. We typically charge weekly and have a convenience method where you can pay monthly and possibly even save a little bit depending on the market. But another very common sort of rent structure in the farmers market industry is percentage rent, either with or without a base. So we don't see too many people anymore charge just a straight percentage where, hey, you show up and you pay 10% of your sales or 15% of your sales or 8% of your sales. Usually it's you show up and you for sure owe us $40. And then if you sell an amount that exceeds that, if 10% of what you sell exceeds that, then you pay the higher rate instead. Or you pay the base rate and then you pay a little bit lower percentage with the percentages on top of the base. So we see a lot of that. We don't do it. There's some pros and cons that we'll talk about in a minute, but a lot of people do that. Some markets have a membership fee. So oftentimes those are markets that are run by maybe farm co-ops or some other kind of co-op where you pay a fee to be part of that society. And I think sometimes that's done because state laws have details in them that make it advantageous to do that. And then those markets, you pay a membership fee. Typically, there's also a weekly fee or a space rent fee for the number of weeks that you're there. Sometimes there's not. Sometimes it's a membership fee, and that gives you the right to be there for X amount of weeks. So again, the ones that are adding a weekly space fee, those are probably lower fees than if you're paying just the membership, which would cover the whole thing. Those membership fees may be lower. So it's complicated. There's a lot of things. So, there's just pros and cons in all of those. There's no one right formula, but they're just variations that we've seen. So what we're going to concentrate a little bit more on in this episode is not setting fees, because we've talked about that in other episodes. We'll undoubtedly talk about it again in future episodes and at the conference. But what we want to talk more about today is actually the process of collecting those fees.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of variations in that too. And we've heard some pain points and things coming up lately on how that all works, especially because I think the basic way of collecting fees took a big shift in 2020. I think a lot of folks were collecting differently prior to COVID protocols than they're collecting now. A lot of things changed.
I think so too. There was a lot of folks that were collecting on-site cash, face-to-face with every single farmer and vendor week to week. And obviously that went out the window. So as we've discussed, we always wanted to transition into online, invoicing, and COVID really just pushed us into that. So that was helpful.
So that's what a lot of people do now. A lot of people invoice in advance. They use something like Square or QuickBooks or nowadays Venmo, although that's a little bit tricky because if you're using Venmo for a business but not pointing out to Venmo that you're a business, you do have the chance that your Venmo account's going to get shut down. We've heard a little bit of that lately. Venmo's kind of getting more into the idea that, yep, free service for consumers. If you're using it as a business, you should be paying a little bit of a fee. Some people collect their rent in checks. I still see stories from other farmers markets about, they mail their check in prior to the start of the season. A lot of times those are the folks that are collecting for a whole season at one time.
Yeah.
So that's a little different.
Which makes sense as well because the processing fees when you are billing folks online, they can get really outrageous, especially if you're collecting a large amount of fees. So maybe preferring a check, or if your market can, bear the labor load, collecting cash either weekly or monthly or something like that, just to take those processing fees out of the equation because they can really add up.
Yeah, I do think that's why a lot of people avoid online invoicing is they don't want to pay those processing fees. And yes, for sure, they can completely add up. There are some ways around that when you're doing online. ACH oftentimes has a percentage, but it's a much smaller percentage. Automatic something. I don't remember what ACH stands for, but it's a process by which, it comes straight from your bank. It doesn't go through a credit card processor. And then one that currently is free, although my suspicion is this is a Google situation where you'll get Gmail for free for a long time, then all of a sudden you're hooked, and then Google will start charging you. I suspect Zelle may turn out to be that way in the long run, but right now, Zelle is completely free. So if you're with the vast majority of banks in the U.S., at least, you can transfer from your bank account to somebody else's bank account with no charge. There's no credit card processing fee. There's no ACH fee. It's fast. You send a Zelle to somebody, they have that money within minutes generally. And so that's a really good one. Again, all of these methods are things that keep coming on new and changing, and they're all sort of tech-oriented. And we find, especially with farmers and our older farmers in particular, that just the process of wrapping your head around something new. Wait, I'm supposed to connect my bank account to your bank account? We have a certain percentage of anarchists in the world of farmers, especially old traditional farmers. And so sometimes they're suspicious, but those can be really effective methods.
For sure. Yeah, I think there's a level of trust that needs to be reached. And then thinking about the number of vendors that you're dealing with, what is something you can do kind of in large batches? I mean, I do online invoices because I can set up automatic invoices for all my vendors. 90% of my vendors are at both my markets every single week. They don't really change. We're adding in some substitutes. Sometimes people are out for vacations or whatnot, so I have to do kind of little adjustments. But for the most part, it's pretty automated. So there is a high level of transaction fees that are associated with that. But to me, it's less labor cost on my end. I mean, my hourly rate or like my staff's hourly rate that has to manage invoicing, thinking of how many hours were to add up doing something, one-on-one, trying to collect individual checks or orchestrate some kind of Zelle transfer. Those are hours that need to be paid either to me or to my manager that's helping me with invoicing. So thinking about that as well, is it better just to pay the transaction fee because time is money?
Yeah, you got to weigh it all out. They've all got, pros and cons. Automatic invoicing is available in many payment processing systems and also market management programs. We've got some great market management programs that make it very simple to invoice through those programs and even to put invoicing on sort of autopilot. It's easy. It's one and done. You can add automatic late fees, which can be handy. We're going to get into late fees in a minute. But then there's also some tricky things about that, some challenges, because dealing with EBT credits if you're on an automatic invoicing system, or remembering to manually cancel an automatic invoice if somebody's out, that's going to be out, that can get hairy, as I think you know.
Or turn it back on when they're back.
Yeah. Oh my gosh. There's a tricky part too.
Yeah. So we're still working through some of those kinks. I'd say the percentage of those issues that are happening are so low that it's still worth it to me to do the system that I'm doing. But that has happened where we just forget to pause somebody's automatic invoice, even though they told me they'd be out in plenty of time. They're not going to get charged for their space. And then it goes through, they're set up on automatic payment. So then it charges them for a day they're not supposed to be there. That triggers like an email from them to me saying, hey, I got charged for this. And then also just being really, really mindful that these are small businesses too. I mean, if someone's going on vacation, they're a small vendor business, it's like that's probably a lot for them. They probably had to get, real tight on cash to be able to miss a market and go out of town. So maybe that automatic draw on their account with that invoice that they weren't supposed to get sent could like do an overdraft situation in their business account. So just trying to be really courteous and thoughtful about that and mindful. I think we've tightened it up a lot, but sometimes things slip through the cracks, or we pause it. They're on vacation for a day. They come back. We forget to unpause it. And then they're there for 3 weeks before either of us realize that they haven't been getting invoiced and charged. So then they get an invoice, for hundreds of dollars. So those kind of little kinks, I mean, on my end, those are kind of my pain points with that. But still, I can't think of a better system to do that. There might be something down the road. The EBT, we do our EBT collection every single market day. And then, the day before the invoice goes out for that market, we are deducting the EBT, the redeemed EBT from that person's invoice. And so that is a lot of like going into those individual automatic invoices to make sure that those EBT deductions are happening. And then some folks, they get more EBT than their space rent is for the week. And so they get like a $0 invoice. So, that's fine too. They're basically paying their space fee with EBT. So less transaction fees, I guess. But if they get, if their space fee is $90 and they got $150 in EBT, then it's like I'm rolling that over to a credit. Or I always offer them, do you want me to just cash you out? Because I don't want to hold on to because that's their money.
Right.
Like I don't want to hold it. So having those conversations. But again, I mean,
you just got to weigh all the challenges, all the pros and the cons, and decide what works the best for you.
Exactly.
Now, there are a lot of markets still, I think, especially smaller markets, I believe, that are collecting fees on site. And actually, some farmers like this best. We've got a tiny little handful of farmers, mostly the older farmers, although I've got a young farmer at our newer market that is he's just not going to deal with the tech of online invoicing. He just won't. And he'll be late, not because he has any resistance to paying on time, but that he just can't quite get his head around sitting down in front of that computer or on the phone if you're on top of it and doing it online. So there's a few farmers that really like the on-site collection the best. Also pros and cons. So obviously that means you don't have that staff time in the office doing those invoices, but you got a lot more staff time at the market. Yeah. And we really tried to calculate that when we went from on-site collection to collection via invoice and through office staff. We definitely cut down some staff hours, probably not as much as you would think or that would make the whole invoicing process balance out, honestly, because we have a long day at the market and you're really busy during opening and you're really busy during closing, but there actually is a lot of time in the middle when the staff doesn't have very specific duties, or at least some of the staff. So I don't, honestly, when we added it all up, we probably still took a hit when we switched to online invoicing. For me, it was more that we got ahead on security when we went to online invoicing, because especially at the larger market, collecting on site pre-COVID, when everybody was handling cash all the time, meant a lot of cash at the market, and that made me uncomfortable for me and my staff.
Exactly. Yeah, just collecting all of that and then having to hold it in the info booth until the end of the day and drive it to the office and all of that. So just managing a large amount of cash, and then also just, when you're exchanging cash like that, like little mistakes can happen. People are miscounting. So $10 here, $10 there can kind of add up day to day. Where invoicing, you can just clearly see where they invoice the correct amount. Did they pay it? It's all clear. You have kind of a reference point. If you're just shoving cash into a bag, you don't know who didn't pay the correct amount.
Harder to catch a mistake and then resolve it.
Exactly. Yeah. So that kind of overhead stuff. But yeah, you're right. I mean, I was just thinking the other day, we have the same amount of staff that we did when we were doing collection.
Yeah.
But I think our customer service has gone up because we're more in the booth and around the market. We're doing a little bit more touch base with people. When we were collecting every day, just going around to every vendor during the market, it was a nice touch point to every single person. And we could say hey, so then if someone had something to bring up, they could talk to the staff, or it would kind of trigger a conversation. So that's something that's missing. So we try to be more conscious of just saying hi to everybody, even though we're not collecting rent right now. So just making that transition, I think, is something we had to work on when we went to online.
I think the touching base was nice, but honestly, the downside of that was we were invariably at some point having to interrupt people's sales.
Yeah.
They would have to take their eye off of who's the next customer walking towards them, who could I greet and entice to walk over to my booth, versus having this conversation with market staff and counting out, paying my bill.
For sure.
Yeah. Then the other thing about doing collections on site is that you're managing a lot of calculations on site, especially if you're doing percentage rent or you're doing EBT or market money credits. We've talked to a few markets that have what seem like really organized systems, but it looks a little bit complicated to me. But they have a calculation sheet and a special envelope they hand out to each vendor. The calcs get figured out on site, so the vendor fills in all their sales. They calculate their percentage. Let's hope everybody has a calculator or a really good math mind. And then they fill that in on a blank on the form. And then there's a spot for how much market money they have and how much EBT they have. And everything goes into that envelope. And then it's calculated either on site or back in the office. And then the market is either billing that vendor for the deficit between market money and EBT and the percentage rent, or they're paying them. And all of that happens the following week, I think, in most of those systems. So it's definitely doable, and a lot of people do it and find it very efficient. It sounds like a lot for me to manage and still be able to make some eye contact with customers and watch traffic and all the other things that you're doing, especially around closing time.
Yep, for sure.
So I think that's kind of mostly moved towards officing and online invoicing, but there's just security issues to think of. There's calculations, which is an easier place to do calculations, at the market or in the office. So then there's some special challenges coming mostly from, and a lot of times I find either at our markets or at other markets, based on the conversations I have with managers, the small handful of vendors who either are very distracted or maybe understaffed. They just don't have time to manage checking online things at the same time they're making their hummus. I don't know. Or they're, gosh, how do I say this? Just not very detail-oriented business people. I think and then very rarely you'll have a vendor that's just trying to get over. They're trying to see if they can stretch out that payment. I think that's fairly unusual in my experience. We've had a few, but mostly that's not why this happens. It mostly happens because people are busy or distracted, or online transactions are not their superpower. That's not what they're good at. They're good at that hands-on, making the jam. So there's just some things that come up with payments, either late payments or how you figure out refunds or that kind of thing. And so that makes your bookkeeping more interesting. So absences, for instance, if you're on an automatic payment system, or if you're on a system where you're invoicing and they're paying, it's more manual, but it's still happening online. And then they call out, especially if they call out last minute. Is that refundable? And if it is refundable, what's the process for that?
Well, for my markets, there is a hard line where just vendors know, and this has been the rule, I think, always. They have to tell me 72 hours ahead of time if they're going to miss a market. So usually it's like they're missing a market they have a family trip or a wedding or something. So they'd tell me like 2 months in advance. It's like, great, I make a note on there so I know that they're not going to be there and they won't be charged. But if they wait until Monday night to email me that they are taking their son to go look at colleges this week and they're already in North Carolina and they're not going to make it to the market this Wednesday. Well, that's too bad. You're going to get you already got your invoice on Monday for the Wednesday market, and that payment is due.
Yeah, because nobody then at that point has time to fill in for them. Some other
Exactly.
vendor that wanted that space doesn't have time to inventory and prep, right?
Exactly. Yes. And it's for that. Like, I can't fill the space and there's an open hole. Then we're missing a category at the market and it's causing, a situation with the shoppers. They can't rely on those kind of things. Because a lot of the vendors that are at both my markets, at least, I have like backups in those categories. And so if someone's out, I can pop someone else in. So maybe it's not their favorite bread vendor, but they can get a baguette at the market like they were expecting to. And so I try to pop a sub in there. But if they don't tell me, I can't tell a baker on Tuesday that, can you please come on Wednesday? They need prep to like let their, I don't know anything about baking, but like let their dough do the thing where it's in the fridge. I don't know. So it's more like being respectful of that and planning ahead. And so I definitely I don't cancel invoices for that kind of stuff. Definitely don't give refunds. I would say if there's like a serious accident, of course, if someone's like injured or like violently sick, like really, or like, sick, I shouldn't say violent. I should say if you're sick, you shouldn't come to the market.
Right.
But if you're ill, or there's a death in the family or something, those are situations where if the vendor reaches out to me and we have a conversation about that, and they already paid for the week, I might credit them for the next week.
Yeah, that's kind of what I do. If it's really serious.
If it's serious, it's really on a case-by-case basis. If they just like forgot to tell me they're going out of town, that's too bad. Like,
right.
You can't just let everybody tell you at the last minute. What's the point of having a rule if you're going to let people forget to tell you? They're responsible for letting you know that they're not going to be there. So
well, and we try to not have rules that don't have good reasons for being rules.
Exactly.
So, the whole thing about not being able to add a bread vendor to the market if your bread vendor tells you last minute that they won't be there, there's a good reason for that rule.
Exactly.
And of course, if you don't enforce it on a consistent basis, it's inequitable to the people that you do enforce it on.
Exactly.
And you don't accomplish what you need to do, which is have enough notice to get bread at the market.
Yeah. And so I try to explain. I mean, if a lot of vendors, I'll say, hey, do you want to know the reason? I can explain this to you. And we have a good conversation about it. So it's like using the bread example. So if a bread vendor's out at the last minute, I can't get another bread person in there. A shopper's coming there to do their grocery shopping. Maybe they have a dinner party that night and they really want, just really locally made sourdough, crunchy bread or whatever. And then they come and that bread vendor's not there. That to them, to the shopper, has now affected the way that they look at farmers markets. Farmers markets are not reliable. I told all my friends I was going to have local bread here and now I can't. That's embarrassing. So it's like a little trickle effect and it affects the whole market. So it's not about that person's not there for the day. It's that we are thinking of the market as a whole and we're a unit, like we're a store. So that's why we need to be really consistent. That's why the rules are enforced consistently. And that's why I think we have good markets.
Sure.
I mean, we are good at running farmers markets. And I think that this type of thing that we do at our markets and that a lot of other markets do, like be very consistent about this, is why. Because we're changing folks' shopping habits. And so attendance is a part of that. And a lot of vendors will say, oh, well, I'll just pay you like the $60 or whatever. Is like, sorry, I can't be there. And I'm always like, look, it really is not about that payment. Like, yes, my budget is, I set my budget very specifically around what I know is going to come in, but it really isn't about that individual fee for that one day. It's about this greater idea that we need to take care of this market as a whole and also be courteous to your fellow vendors.
Yeah.
Because if you have a shopper that's upset at the market,
they're upset at the whole market. They're not just upset about that missing bread. They're, as you say, having those feelings that they can't rely on their farmer's market.
Exactly. So that's really like the fee conversation. I think sometimes vendors just think that we just want to collect all the money that we possibly can, and it's really not about that to me. I mean, I do need to meet my budget. I need to pay my staff. I need to pay the porta potty bill, but like it's way more than that, and that's why I try to get ahead of it. I'm very clear with the vendors. It's not a secret like when the fees are due and what the guidelines are for that. I make it very clear, so I'm not trying to like catch them doing something bad, but it's important that they all follow that.
Well, and I think that's the key point in making making it not become a confrontational situation or anything is that absences, refunds, etc., any of those rules, the key always comes back to communication. Just be clear about your expectations, be consistent about how you enforce it, and everybody will get it.
Yeah,
and maybe not call out last minute.
Maybe not call out last minute. I mean, it's a reciprocal thing. So like you communicate, you expect communication. That's it. And folks can tell. I mean, vendors come to me and they say, I know I'm not supposed to like miss 2 markets in a row, or it's hard for you to fill my spot, but I really need to take a 2-week break. Like I'm overwhelmed, or I need to refresh my booth, or I have a big event coming up and it's a whole weekend, so I need the weekend off and I need the next weekend to recover. All those things come up, but it's just they come to me and they have a conversation with me and I go, okay, now I can plan ahead because I can pop somebody in your spot that makes sense while you're gone, or so we can have a conversation about it. But it's when they just wait until the very last second and send me a little note, I can't come on Saturday. It's like, come on. Like, this is a professional business. This isn't, I'm not your professor. It's like a college class. And it's not like, okay, fine, then you'll just fail. That's not the situation. Like,
right.
We need to be in more of a partnership.
We're all in it together.
Yeah.
I believe we've wandered down a squirrel hole away from our topic about billing.
Okay, well,
but I'm glad you were able to get that out.
Clearly, I'm having a little situation here.
So, speaking of aggravations, how about late payers?
Yeah.
I mean, this is a thing. And every time this conversation comes up, we'll be talking to market managers that either completely sympathize or they're like, oh, well, if they don't pay, they don't get to come. Again, that's tricky because you want them to come. You want to fill that category. You want to give your shoppers what they expect. So, yes, it's that cut and dried, and no, it's not that cut and dried.
Yeah.
So, when you've got somebody that's paying late on those invoices that you're sending out, you do reminders, you do warnings, you do explanations. I can't remember if you started it or if we heard it from somebody else and then you've picked it up, but I love the way you talk to people and say, hey, look, I've already had to pay. I've had to turn the money in to Parks and Rec if you're working for that. In our case, it's usually we're turning money into a business association that we're partnered with to do markets. I've already had to turn that money in. You haven't paid me. Means it's out of my pocket. Would you be okay if somebody just picked up a product off of your table and walked off and said, hey, I'll pay you when I get around to it? I mean, no, you wouldn't, because you have to buy ingredients for your next market. So I felt like that was such a good, clear way to explain to vendors why it's just not fair to pay your bill late.
Yeah, like my product that I'm selling is booth space at the market. That's what I sell because I pay heavily for providing that space to folks. And so if you come and you take a space, you're in a space, but then you say, oh, I'm going to, pay you whenever, or I can't pay you right now. Or do I have to pay for that? But you already took it. It's just like, well, can I eat one of your tomatoes and tell you that like, I can't really pay you for that, but I already ate it. So it's just, sorry. It's harsh because I think they're like, what's the big deal? It's just an empty space on the street. But maybe it doesn't occur to them that like I paid a lot of money for that empty space in the street.
Right.
Like there was a car parked there this morning. And so see how there's not? And like see how there's like traffic control and like barricades and like shoppers can walk up to you safely. Like, I mean, there's a lot of cost that goes into that. So sometimes vendors just aren't thinking about that. But then sometimes I'm like, what are we doing here? Like, hey, buddy, don't do that. And so I think we have had problems with folks paying late. When we were collecting on site, obviously that was way less of a problem. Although once in a while, it'd be like an employee. And they'd say, I don't have enough cash in my till. I don't have a check. I don't know. So that was very rare, but that would be the only like, quote, late payment that we'd get with on-site collections. But with invoicing, it was kind of a problem. And it took so much of my time to send reminders. And I was at a training at the agriculture department just like a few months ago. And I was there with another market manager, our friend Art at PB. I don't know if he listens to this podcast, but he's an ex-employee of us, and he gave me great advice and helped my business greatly. That. Yes. He said, oh, I just charge a late fee. I go, what do you mean a late fee? He goes, yeah, it's just automatic, like through Square. If you don't pay it by, whatever his cutoff date is, like noon on Monday for his Tuesday market, it's a $20 fee. And
whoa.
Yeah, $20.
$20.
Yes. So I was like, oh my gosh. I go, do you get like blowback on that? He goes, honestly, no. He goes, everyone's like, oh, shoot, I better pay on time. Or they pay Wednesday morning for the Tuesday market. And he's like, and then I get $20 on top of their vendor fee. He goes, but that's their choice.
Yeah.
And so then I immediately started that at our market. So
That makes so much sense.
yeah.
And then I think we heard another market manager call it an expediting fee, which is funny because it's sort of like if you apply for your permit at the health department and the event you're applying to participate in starts in less than 14 days, they'll expedite your permit application, but you pay a chunk. I mean, I think in our case it's like $75. You pay that extra to get your permit application expedited. Well, I guess you pay that extra $20 to get your invoice expedited.
Yeah.
Because now we have to be doing bookkeeping the night before the market instead of working on our map again.
Exactly.
Revising the map or, doing more marketing and doing more social media that benefits the whole market. So
Yeah.
if you're going to make us work for you during a time when we could be doing something more productive, you have to pay an expediting fee.
That's kind of how I think of it. And it's like a late invoice takes up time for me because I have to adjust my roster sheet and make a note who's paying late. If it's like more than a couple days late, I send them an email. They're getting automatic invoices from QuickBooks, but I send them a personal email. I go, hey, I'm not going to reserve your space this coming market until you take care of the invoice from last market. So I'm like kind of hardcore on that. But that's all takes like so much time of mine.
Yeah.
So it's like I have to link to that. And so you're just paying me, a late fee to handle that. Related to that, like you said, some of these businesses, just small businesses, they're busy. Maybe it's their side job. Like maybe they're just not very tech savvy. Like there's a lot of reasons that folks don't pay their invoices on time. As a sometimes disorganized person, I can totally understand that. Like I get that it's hard for them. I have had at this point a fair handful of conversations with vendors saying, look, I don't want your late fee. Like, yes, do I want extra cash every week? Sure, that's fun. But I don't want you to pay more than what this booth space is worth, which is how I set my prices. This booth space is worth X amount of dollars. That's what you should be paying for it. But now you're paying that plus the late fee. And I don't want you to do that to your own business. I don't want you to go in the hole because of late fees. So how can we figure this out? And I've had good conversations with a lot of vendors that just were like, I'm so sorry, I'm busy. And we've transitioned them to monthly payments. So they're paying the month. And then, they know and they're like really dedicated. They pay that one time and then they don't have to think about it every week.
Right.
Because some of these folks are getting a late fee every single week. I mean, a month full of with 4 late fees, that's significant.
Yeah,
So especially with these small businesses. So I don't want that late fee. I'm not trying to get an extra fee from people. If I wanted more money from vendors, I would just raise booth spaces. That's not what I want. So working with them and saying, hey, do you want to pay the month? I sent a lot of tutorials to folks, like YouTube tutorials from QuickBooks. This is how you set up automatic payment. So it just pays automatically. So you don't have to...
just put your card on file and it just automatically clicks in. So much easier.
We have so many of our vendors on automatic payments because they're busy and they don't want to miss a single email that's coming through or have to remind themselves to go in and put their card information and pay it every single time. But then if they don't, they're going to get a late fee. So it's, make it easier for yourself.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I mean... Communication. And then sometimes you get past all those nice conversations and communications and you actually have to get to the point where you say, hey, if you pay late again, we're going to cancel your reservation. You just can't be here anymore. This is part of the process. You have to pay your rent. I have to pay all my expenses. You have to pay your rent. Then you can be here. And if not, we're going to cancel your reservation. And we usually will do 1 or maybe 2 warnings. But then again, in fairness to the people that are paying on time, you need to be really open about what your expectations are, and you need to consistently enforce your rules.
Yeah.
So people talk to each other, and if you get a reputation for you let anybody, run up 3 or 4 markets worth of booth fees and not collect from them, other people aren't going to take it as seriously that it does need to be done on time. So in fairness, you need to be consistent about enforcement, and at some points you're going to have to lose a vendor. And I know that gets really tricky if that's your only cheese vendor and you really don't want to lose that category at the market, but it's just not fair to everybody else to let them slide because they have that product that you like and not consistently enforce this.
For sure. Yeah. And I can understand in a market that's really, trying to build. And so they're trying to hold on to every single vendor. And so they really, sometimes it's easier to let rules kind of ease and slide. But like we have always said, it is very much in your best interest to keep your criteria tight, stick to your mission, make sure you're consistently enforcing all your rules and guidelines. It really will work in the long run. You'll have a much better market. It's just kind of a tough transition period that you can have sometimes, but it really is important that you stay consistent with that stuff. And it's tough. And I've, have had to say, okay, you owe me 2 weeks worth of booth fees and you've told me every day you're going to pay it, you haven't paid it, I'm not reserving a space for you this Saturday. I put someone else in your spot. And, if you get all caught up, as long as you're paying ahead of time, maybe your due date is Thursday instead of Friday. So I make sure that it's in, then you can come back. And I mean, they could walk and then you just have a, whole of what they owe you and you're kind of out that money. But in the end, I always feel better about having a group of vendors that respects the rules and
Sure.
respectful of me and my business that they're, a part of. And, it's just kind of, you have to draw that tough line. It's hard sometimes because you see folks usually like they're paying because they're spaced out or something, but sometimes it's like they're just having a really hard time and they're cash strapped. And it's just really hard as a farmer's market manager to be like, I see that you're taking care of a sick relative or you just had a baby or something. Like there's things that are like, okay, I know that you're cash strapped right now. You need to also pay me. So,
and you know what? You're not doing them a favor to let them think that this business is working.
Yeah.
If they can't pay their space rent, because honestly, that's not the biggest part of your overhead in any of these businesses.
Mm-hmm.
If they can't pay their space rent, there's probably other things they can't pay. Maybe they're not paying themselves. I mean, at some point, you're maybe doing somebody a favor to say, hey, you need to sit down and come to look at the reality of your numbers and this business. And no matter how passionate you are about this product, is this serving you and your family well to be running this business? Because if they're gradually getting in the hole with us, they're probably gradually getting in the hole in other areas of this business. And maybe they need to step out and look at whether the business is viable or whether it's just not the right time for them to invest in a business that takes time to build, as most businesses do. Maybe it would be better for them to stop for a bit.
Yeah, exactly. And again,
for their sake.
For their sake and communication and, taking care of each other in that way. So,
yeah. And then there's some special challenges when it comes to percentage markets. So one of the reasons we've never had a percentage fee market is because I just don't want to get into a challenging, confrontational kind of relationship with my vendors. And honestly, I mean, I just know anecdotally, even though we don't run percentage markets, I talk to vendors who say, oh, I'm doing this much at your market, but don't tell that other manager because he charges a percentage and I don't report that much. So we know there's tons of honest farmers and vendors out there that just report every penny. And there are farmers and vendors, what do we used to say? Percentage markets make liars out of the nicest people that are underreporting. So percentage markets work great for a lot of people. I've been told by a lot of managers that they and their vendors have really strong mutual trust, that the vendors realize that the space fees go to making the market stronger and to supporting the market's basic expenses, and that they would never not report every sale number. But I mean, there's some folks that just don't. And so what do you do about that? I know that a lot of the markets around us, and especially in the LA area and a little bit north, have a formal auditing procedure. And what I was just hearing from one manager that I thought was actually sort of brilliant is he says when he gets into a situation where he's looking around and he's kind of watching the sales and he's looking at what one farmer is reporting versus what another farmer is reporting, and he just has suspicions. He's just feeling like some of those folks are not reporting accurately. He says what he does, first of all, is put out an advisory to all the vendors, a heads up, we're going to be doing specific audits, random farmers and vendors. We're going to pick 8 people at random on any given Saturday and 8 people the next week, and we're going to audit sales just to see how things are going. And he said immediately sales reporting numbers go up. As soon as he announces that there's an audit coming, they go up.
It's so funny. The market gets busier.
It gets busier magically.
Yeah.
So he says a lot of times it turns out the audit's really simple. They're not turning up any problems because he's warned people and they don't want to get caught, not being honest about things. And so things are fixed. But then if that doesn't work, if things just don't fall into line and there's still somebody that's just way off and watching them, it appears that their prices are about the same as everybody else's and the foot traffic at their booth is the same, but they're way under what other people's sales are. Then he says then they do audits. And he tries to make it random. Oftentimes, you'll see a problem with a single vendor. And so you send out an advisory reminding everybody about that issue so it doesn't look like you're picking on that one person. So he'll make sure they get audited, the people that he has suspicions about. But he also audits some folks that he knows are going to come up perfectly clean.
Yeah.
And then they go in and they do an audit. So what they do in order to do that, and some people use volunteers for that, he said, and I agree, that this should be paid staff. They put somebody in the booth who records every transaction that happens. They just stand to somebody's side and they write down everything that's sold, and then they add it up at the end. And if there's a significant discrepancy that day versus what on an average they've been reporting, then they got a problem. And then they have to talk about that. And he has some kind of specific procedures about how that's presented to them, the options that they have for making it right. They can get back billed for other weeks based on their true average, or they can leave the market. And that's kind of their choices. So that sounds to me like no fun at all for anybody involved. But that is how I know some of the larger markets that do percentages have to handle it.
Yeah, I like that approach where it doesn't sound like he's trying to go like, "Ooh, I caught you. You did this wrong. I'm going to, catch you and you're going to have to pay me a bunch of money." It's more like, "Hey, I'll give you a chance to kind of turn this around." Maybe they're just tired at the end of the day and kind of filling in the same numbers every week and not really paying attention to their sales. I don't know what happens at percentage markets.
Yeah.
But yeah,
well,
I like
that
that
happens
approach.
on our load lists. We don't do percentage, but we do still have to collect load lists for our state ag department. California has some interesting procedures. And we'll see a farmer that seems to be just as busy as everybody else. Their prices are about the same as everyone else's. Their load list is coming in super low, or they have to list every product and, what was your total for tomatoes today and what was your total for oranges or avocados. And we'll see them being real off. Or sometimes we'll see load lists that come in where it's exactly, I sold $2,020 today every single day of all the season round, no matter what's on the table. Yeah, and it's like,
so consistent.
yeah, you're not reporting correctly. So
Yeah.
sometimes I'm sure it's just that. It's just they've picked a number that sounds like it's probably what they sell. I mean, maybe it's a reflection that they're not very good at inventorying and tracking sales themselves.
Yeah.
Sometimes, sadly, it's a situation where it's an employee at the market and he's under-reporting to the farmer in addition to the market. And so the market's kind of doing the farmer a favor by coming in and saying, "Hey, let's figure out what you're really selling."
Yeah.
So there's a lot there. But it's kind of why we've been a flat fee market all this time, is because we don't want to get into that. But if you are a percentage market and you have any of those concerns, we're assuming you set your percentages the same way we set our flat stall rates, which is you're setting them at an amount that's fair to the farmer and that also covers all of your expenses to create a busy market.
Mm-hmm.
And so you can't afford for people to underreport.
Exactly.
If that's how your budget is. So
yeah,
that's the other thing.
Yeah.
So what if you're doing something, what if you've got one fee structure and system and you decide to change to a different one? How do we do that?
Well, we could have a worldwide pandemic and force everybody to change everything that they're doing. And then it doesn't seem like such a big change because you're just, everything's changing.
Yeah, let's do that. No,
never
let's
again.
not do that again.
No. We don't speak of this. I think give people warning. I think farmers and vendors at farmers markets are generally change averse.
Like all of us.
Like all of us creative mind, independent business owner types. So the more warning and explanation maybe you can give them, the better. Explain why you're transitioning. Maybe not every personal business detail, but what the reason is, what things are going to be better for them with the change.
Yeah, I'd use a lot of WIFM there. The what's in it for me.
Yeah.
Anytime you're trying to sell anybody on an idea, think about how it's going to benefit them.
Yes.
Giving them a whole lot of information about how it's going to benefit you. Interesting.
Yeah.
Not that meaningful.
No, something more specific, like it'll save you time and less paperwork and be automated. You can get reports printed at the end of the year, whatever, like something that will really help them and
right.
Be a benefit to them.
Yeah. Point out the things that are going to benefit them. Make sure they understand the benefit. Give them plenty of warning.
And
nobody likes a sudden change. Make sure everybody's trained on the same thing. So make sure your staff can answer questions exactly the way you would, so that everybody gets good information. Send it out all the ways.
Yeah.
Do the email advisories. Do the printed heads up that you hand to people at the market. Chit chat with them. Answer questions, and then plunge ahead. Sometimes the system isn't the best just because we've always done it this way.
Yeah.
Think about what really is the best way to do it in your own changing situation, and jump on in there. Give them lots of notice and jump on in.
You can do it. We believe in you. Farmers markets are community gathering places, paths to better nutrition, small business incubators, and the best way we know to keep farmers farming. Farmers markets are also businesses where participants and operators should each be able to create income from their efforts, gaining a living wage or better. Analyzing bookkeeping issues isn't necessarily the most fun part of making a market, but it's one of the steps that can add up to keeping your farmers market healthy and thriving for years to come, and that's the very best bottom line.
Thanks for listening today, and big thanks to Square for helping farmers market participants and managers increase their income and reduce their stress, and for supporting Tent Talk, the Farmers Market podcast, and the Intense Conference. To sign up for easy credit card processing on site at markets and simple invoicing back at your desk, just click the Square logo on the resource page at farmersmarketpros.com.
Please leave us a review on your podcast app or wherever you listen to Tent Talk. Let us and others know how you're enjoying the podcast. Be sure to subscribe so you don't miss the next episode of Tent Talk. Connect with fellow farmers market folks in our private Facebook group, the Farmers Market Pros Community, and follow us on Instagram at Farmers Market Pros. Find online education and other resources at farmersmarketpros.com. Tent Talk is brought to you by Farmers Market Pros, where passion meets profit. Tent Talk is hosted by Kat Fields White and Bridget Myers and produced by Leandra Hayes, with original music by David Mead. Tune in next week for another great episode.